Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we are joined by an old friend and a great, great writer. His name is Joe Gores. He lives up in Marin County. His new book is called Glass Tiger. It's an Otto Penzler book, and Otto is still with us, thank the Lord.
Otto is still with us.
And
Praise
it's
God.
published by Harcourt. It's great to have you back.
It's good to be back, Jim.
Great to have you back. And I was looking at the material that your publisher sent over, and one of the things they mentioned about a bunch of your past
former glories,
former all-stars.
Yeah, right.
And they say things like praise for. Praise for A Time of Predators, which is your first novel published in 1969.
That's right.
When you were 18 years old.
You've got it.
About 18 at the time. And it says here, quote, a classic example of Gores's clean style and murky moral code. And your father confessor, that worries me. Like a lot of seminal works in noir fiction, this one was long out of print until Otto Penzler picked it for a new series of vintage Edgar-winning novels. Good choice, Otto.
Yes.
And that's from the New York Times Book Review. So congratulations for that.
You. Yeah.
And that was something done in 04, 05 when it was
redone because it was an Edgar winner. So
and then there's a book here that off air you said something very interesting about. The book is called Interface, and you said it's the closest you ever got to really doing what you were trying to do in a book.
Well, all writers...
What do you mean by that?
Well, all writers set out... You have an idea. You have something in your head. Mm-hmm. And you're going to write it out. And you write it out, and it's baloney. And then you have to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. But with Interface, somehow, it just... I wrote the thing in 8 weeks... And it was set in San Francisco, and I went around, because it's a very intricate kind of plot, I had to have all of the timings perfectly. So I went around with a stopwatch, walking or driving or riding buses, so that all of the manipulations of people would add up. And it somehow just came out just the way I had envisioned it when I first started it. And that book started with a notebook entry that I just wrote down a sentence that came into my head one day.
Wow.
The dead Mexican lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. And suddenly I'm saying, who's the dead Mexican? Where is he? Why? And I had to write the book to find out.
Now you're being haunted by the dead
no, because I wrote the book. So.
Well, notice, though, that only in San Francisco could you ride around with a stopwatch on buses and nobody would say anything.
Well, this was, after all, back a ways.
Oh, back a ways.
Back a ways, 1974.
There you go.
Recall, yeah.
Well, Gores writes beautifully, they said about Interface, with never a wasted word, with a fine feeling for characterization. He handles violence as a wise man handles nettles. Again, your friends at the New York Times Book Review, you pay
they've been very
guys.
Nice to me. They have.
Now let's talk about Glass Tiger.
Glass Tiger.
Glass Tiger. Now, I think that this is the best of Joe Gores, at least in my reading experience.
Well,
the thing, and I also find it very exciting. It seems to me that it's challenging in a way that so many of the other books that you've written that I've read are not challenging.
Yeah.
This one is challenging, I think, in terms of its scope, and in terms of the heat of the plot. There's nothing subtle here. This is very clearly good versus evil on the grand scale.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I'm an old Notre Dame boy.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame boys are taught, at least when I was there.
Yes.
We're taught to consider...
play football. Oh, no.
No. I only interhope football.
Oh, okay.
Boy, did I get creamed in a game with Indiana prison. The Indiana, we played the prison guys. Oh, God. Anyway.
All right.
But you ended up considering ultimates at Notre Dame in philosophy or in ethics or in literature. You considered ultimates. The central core in the English department there was a philosophy of literature. So you were always thinking, good, evil. How does this thing fit into its own time? So with Glass Tiger, I wanted to fit that book into our time, and consider things that this book 20 years ago you wouldn't write it, because these things weren't available and weren't going on, and now it's about a guy who was an assassin and another guy who was an assassin.
And it's played on the grand national scale,
all over the place. And
guys are racing all around the country.
Starts out in Africa.
Looking for one another, and starts out in Africa. Well, Glass Tiger is full of violence, daring do, nasty bad guys, and because Joe Gores is writing it, it's educational. It teaches you, for example, what it is, a doppelganger. We'll find out when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Joe Gores is our guest today. One more time. Wonderful to have him back. Glass Tiger, a novel on a grand scale, is the new book. The publisher is Harcourt. And, of course, it's an Otto Penzler book. Publishers Weekly was dull in its review. They say Edgar-winning Gores will satisfy action junkies with this fast-paced, suspenseful standalone. It is fast-paced. It is suspenseful, but it's not for action junkies. Darn it! It's much more interesting than that. And then they say something nice at the end. Gores artfully shifts perspective between the hunter and the hunted. And indeed, there is a phrase of the book that I marked, which I probably won't find now, is that the question becomes, who is the hunter?
Who is the hunter?
And
exactly.
Who is the hunter? Now, this, believe it or not, as I see it, all comes from understanding what it is. A doppelganger.
What is a doppelganger?
Yes, and it's up to you to explain it.
Okay.
Because every time I see the darn thing, I've got to go look it up. And I say, I should know what that means. And it's in this. The word is in your book.
The word is in the book.
Yeah.
So
I
got
think your wife, Dory, told you to put it in.
She probably did.
Yeah.
She tells me all the good stuff that's in the book. She tells me.
Tell us what it is.
Okay, a doppelganger is a sort of yourself in another form, and the poetess Anne Sexton, who unfortunately knocked herself off, but she used the phrase in one of her poems, "I am your doppelganger," and she's talking about the person is talking to herself. And in this, we have a man in his 50s who has been a bad guy in his life. And he has been a mercenary in all of the hot spots in the world. And he is threatening perhaps the life of the country. He on the president's inauguration day, he sends him a letter, an overnight letter that says, "Congratulations to a dead president," which suggests that he has designs upon the president.
This is not a way to start out your presidency.
No. So
now, but then he is being tracked.
Well, yeah, he is. They can't find him. Mm-hmm. This guy is so elusive. The FBI, everybody's looking for him. So they go to the computer and they say, "Find us a guy who can find this guy for us." And that's where the hero of our book, Brendan Thorne, shows up. He's in Africa minding his own business. He is also a guy, though a generation younger. He's just turning 40. He did bad things, not as a mercenary, but he was a ranger in Panama. Then when he stopped being a ranger, he was brought in by the CIA as a CIA cover company to try and stop the drug trade in Colombia coming into Panama. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he killed people, and he did a lot of bad stuff too, but he always felt, "I'm doing my duty." But then, for personal reasons, he suddenly couldn't do it anymore. And he quit, and he went to Africa to become a guard at a fancy game reserve. Fancy game.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he has eschewed violence.
Yes.
He doesn't want to be violent.
He doesn't want to be violent.
And when he takes this job, he's
dragooned into,
he's right back into it.
Yeah.
You're right. This is Corwin talking.
Yeah, the man who's the older man. Yeah.
This was no ordinary Phoebe. There's a new word.
Phoebe?
Phoebe.
For the FBI agents.
FBI agents are called Phoebes in this book. He wasn't armed. He'd checked out the animal and bird sign around the cabin, circled it within the bush, and then went in boldly. Now, starting down the burn, he seemed to sense observation. Through the intervening foliage, Corwin tracked him with the binoculars, totally at home in the woods. A man who had never been a desk jockey, a hunter, highly trained in the same ways Corwin himself had once been trained. This is his mirror image.
Yeah, that's his
Ben had trained himself further as Corwin had. And now the real central issue, or one of the central issues of the book. So who was the hunter here? Who was the prey?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that is a good question.
It's a very good question, and we hold on to that for practically the whole book. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that you continually do in your book is you give us moments of writing that are absolutely breathtaking, in my opinion.
Well, thank you,
and when
Jim.
we come back, we're going to share one of those with the guys out there.
Good. Let's do it.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. Glass Tiger is the title of the book. Joe Gores is the author. And before the break, I said, as happens in every one of your books that I'm familiar with, there are a couple of places where you just want to read it out loud.
Oh,
now, Corwin is getting himself ready to take a pop at the President of the United States, and here's what it sounds like. Corwin dropped awkwardly into his spider hole. That sounds where they got that other guy in a spider hole.
Spider hole. Yeah, that's a term from Vietnam, and he was a Vietnam guy, so...
But it's also a term from Saddam Hussein.
Oh,
Isn't that
right.
where he was? He was caught in a spider hole.
That's right.
Well, let's start over again. Yeah. Corwin dropped awkwardly into his spider hole, unslung the rifle from his shoulder, and leaned it against the rock wall, still in its carry case. He rested his butt against the same wall, hands on knees, panting. He was winded, but here, unseen, he reached under the overhang to bring out his tripod and set it up. He slid his bolt-action Model 70 Magnum, made by Winchester in 1951, often called the rifleman's rifle, from its worn fleece-lined soft leather case. Its metal was heat-treated to withstand the high temperature of 1,000-yard shooting. It's amazing detail. I love it. Yeah. Already attached was his old tried-and-true Unertel 36 power scope that was nearly as long as the rifle barrel, already sighted in. Finally, he attached the rifle to its tripod, took out his H&H Magnum shells in .300 caliber with their 4-inch long Sierra 280 grain slugs. He slid a single shell into the chamber. He didn't plan on needing more than one. Now, the amazing thing about that is it's great detail, and it's a big moment in the book. Mm-hmm. And what happens after that is a big surprise. I was going to say it makes no sense. It makes a lot of sense when you finally get through it. But you think this is going to be the climactic, and I'm thinking, what the heck is Gores going to do now? The president will be dead, and blah, 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 blah. That ain't exactly what happens.
No.
But what continues to happen is an exposition of a level of evil, a class of evil, at the highest level that's totally disturbing.
Yeah, it was to me. That's why I wrote the book, among other things. I think, when you think about Washington and politics, it's easy to say these people are corrupted by the need for money, by people who, and that is true. But it is also true they lose their way. They forget what they're there for. They forget what it's all about. It becomes life in the Beltway. That's what it's all about. And they cease to understand the rest of America. They only understand themselves, each other. And I think that I don't buy the thing that said, the Catholic thing of the Jesuit thing, evil is the absence of good. Evil is positive.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Evil is positive. It is not just that good isn't here. Yeah. People can choose evil, and they do every day.
The other thing that comes through in the book is what these Washingtonians have forgotten. Mm-hmm. I mean, at the elected level, they've forgotten that at some point they felt this was a call.
Yes.
That this was, if you will, a vocation.
Yeah.
And that they were going to do things for their fellow citizens, for their fellow men and women, right. and raise the level of the country.
Well, it used to be, Jim. My grandfather, my father's father, was in the Minnesota State Legislature for either 2 years or 4 years, and then he went home and ran his store again. That's what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
They go in, they give their time and service. A member of the Atomic Energy Commission, was an old friend of mine, Willard Bascom, once said, and he spent a lot of time in Washington, he said, it takes you have 6 years in Washington. It takes you 2 years to learn what you're doing. Then 2 years you're doing it, you're good.
Correct.
Then 2 more years where the disillusionment sets in to the point where you just leave.
And you better leave.
But the politicians don't leave.
No, they don't.
They stay.
No, there are no term limits there. We have them here in the state of California, of course.
Yeah, and guys, the FBI guys and guys like the civil servants, they don't leave either.
People should understand that while we're being very philosophical talking about the background of this book goes along at what most reviewers would call a breakneck pace. But I hate to use that term because that suggests that you're going to get lost, and you're not going to get lost because it's always clear, really, what's going on and or what might be going on just beneath the surface, all of which is to describe what a thriller mystery book should be when it's very good. And that's what we have here. It's called Glass Tiger. The author is Joe Gores. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.